Well, hello and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for tuning in today. We are already a week away from the start of school, and we wanted to take this opportunity to talk to you and answer your questions about the start of school. So we've received approximately 160 questions through the Back to School website, and I just want to thank everyone who submitted questions and for being engaged in making this school year a great one for all. So we won't be addressing every question today, but we'll discuss some of the most common questions we have received. If you do have specific questions about school routines or additional needs of children, please reach out to your school's administration directly. So that's the principal or vice principal, or you can bring it up with your teacher. We want you all to feel as prepared as possible to return to school. So today, I'm joined by our Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Heather Morrison. Thank you for being here. As well as Norbert Carpenter, the Acting Director of the Public Schools Branch. Hello, Norbert. And François Rouleau, who is our new Directeur Général of the Commission scolaire de langue française. Bonjour, François.
Bonjour.
All right, without further ado, let's get started. First, I'm going to ask Norbert and François to provide an overview of their educational authority school systems and what your students can expect to see this school year. So Norbert, why don't you start?
Sure, and thank you, Mr. Trivers. In the Public Schools Branch at this moment, we have 19,783 students registered for September, and that's across 56 schools from Tignish to Surrey, and we serve the public with 3,000 employees plus. Schools will look very similar, even though there has been a lot of talk about how schools will run as we start on September 8th. They will look similar, but with some very strict protocols in place to help keep students safe and staff safe. Some of the things you will notice will be designated entrances and exits to buildings. There will be cohorting. Students will be grouped in cohorts, which is a subgroup. Directional signage in the school. Additional hand sanitizing stations in classrooms and common areas. And classrooms will be set up as best as possible to maintain physical distancing. Additional disinfecting and cleaning will take place in all our buildings, especially in high-touch surface areas. Students will be involved in cleaning their desks after they leave the classroom, which is a normal practice for many of our students.
Okay. Hey, François, what about our French language schools? Comment avez-vous préparé la rentrée pour les élèves et le personnel?
Oui, merci, Monsieur le ministre. Alors, l'équipe administrative a développé un plan pour l'ensemble de la CSLF et pour chaque. Les préparatifs vont bon train et les 6 écoles sont prêtes à recevoir plus de 1100 élèves le 8 septembre prochain. The administrative team has developed a plan for the entire CSLF and for each of its schools. Preparations are well underway, and the 6 schools will be ready to receive more than 1,100 students on September 8th.
Okay, thank you, merci. So when we talk about cohorts, there will be times, definitely be times, when cohorts may have to mix and at any given time during the day. So I wanted to ask what measures are in place to reduce the possibility of transmission among different cohorts. Norbert, do you want to take the lead on this one again?
For sure. So as I said earlier, cohorts are a subgroup within the school, and every school in our province is different and it's configured differently, and the layout is differently. So some cohorts would be homeroom classes. You'll see many of those cohorts. Others may be 1 or 2 classes that are combined to be a cohort based on proximity to one another in the building. So many measures are taken place to keep the cohorts intact throughout the day. However, you will notice that required masking is now has been now announced, and that will help with some of our larger schools when it comes to transition zones between classes where cohorts may interact with one another. These are some of the practices that will take place, and also the good hand hygiene and other measures that I mentioned previously.
Thank you, Norbert. Of course, really, we want our schools to be safe environments. And a lot of it is really about common sense, the things that Dr. Morrison has been talking about all along during this pandemic. Now, Some people have questions and concerns about air quality in schools and the virus potentially being able to spread if it circulates in the air. So, Dr. Morrison, what can you tell us about the spread of COVID-19 and its ability to circulate within our schools, within the air and ventilation?
Thank you, Minister. I guess first I'd like to just say that, P.E.I. is in a really good position, really ideal conditions for the return to safely restart school because we have low community prevalence and transmission of COVID-19 and no evidence of widespread community transmission with all our cases related to travel. So, and then generally overall, in Canada, 8.5% of the COVID cases have been in children 0 to 19 years of age, and the majority have had only mild symptoms and sometimes no symptoms at all. And while the role of youth in the transmission of COVID-19 isn't always clear, those over 10 years of age appear to transmit the virus similar to adults. And what we do know is that to date, children have not been the main driver of this pandemic. But with everyone returning to school, the whole world really is watching what's going to happen as children return to school. And, we've talked about it. I know you both have mentioned it. The most effective ways to limit the spread of COVID-19 in any closed indoor space are around physical distancing, hand hygiene, screening, staying at home if you're not feeling well, the cohorts that you mentioned, and even within the schools, the enhanced cleaning and disinfection. And these measures together are our best defenses against COVID-19 in all the situations, including the school environment. In terms of the ventilation, and we want to look at good classroom ventilation and the systems around that. We encourage windows to be open as much as possible, activities to be outdoors as much as possible, and to allow the flow of fresh air. But what we know about the virus, and we have to remind ourselves often, it's spread by large droplets. And that's if someone wipes their nose and touches a surface, those would be large droplets, or if someone's coughing and it's either coughed and someone breathes that in if they're not at least 6 feet apart, or if the droplets fall and you touch that surface and touch your face. So we have to remember what we know about the virus and how it is transmitted. But maybe
Well, thank you so much. And, this is a good time as ever to thank you for your excellent guidance through this pandemic. And I know in our education system, there are some schools that have rooms with few windows, or even some with no windows, some areas. And so I did want to mention that I know in the education authorities that they've been working hard, all the staff there, to make sure that the ventilation is adequate even in those places. So thank you. So, Norbert, I believe you referenced the mask policy for students and staff quickly in a previous question. But let's get into it a bit more, because the mask policy was strengthened last week. So maybe you can give us an overview of what the mask policy will look like at our island schools, and then peut-être François, et en français, s'il vous plaît. Norbert?
Thank you, Minister. And you were right, there were some updates to mask policy last week. And just to go over a few details, but I do want to reiterate what Dr. Morrison just said. We're very fortunate in our schools right now, in our communities, not to have evidence of community spread or no evidence of students, school-age children, having the virus. But out of an abundance of caution, our school buses pose a challenge, and the challenge would be it's very difficult to maintain proper physical distancing on a school bus if the buses are reaching capacity. And we believe that our buses will be reaching capacity on some routes. So for all students, K to 12, traveling on a school bus, a mask is now mandatory. A non-medical mask should be worn while traveling on the bus at all times. Also, In the school, when school is going on, we're asking mandatory mask use at certain points during the day. For our 7 to 12 students, that would include any transitions in the building where you may be coming in contact with members of other cohorts. So that's 7 to 12 again. Now, for our K to 6 students, there's no change. Still strongly recommending mask use when appropriate. Except one exception to that would be when students are involved in emergency protocols. So in schools, we have fire drills, we also have lockdown drills, we have bus evacuations. So it's really, really important that students have a mask with them so they can wear it during these times. And I do want to mention that we do realize that not everyone can wear a mask. And there will be exceptions on a case-by-case basis to make sure we are being responsive to all needs of our students.
Okay, François. En français?
Oui, en français. Alors, nous, à la CSLF, nous avons déjà en place au bureau au siège social ces pratiques, c'est-à-dire celle de porter un masque lors de nos déplacements. Alors, tout le personnel dans nos écoles sont aussi demandés de porter le masque. Et puis, ce sera la pratique aussi pour les élèves de la 7e à la 12e. Alors, les masques seront obligatoires dans les déplacements et dans les autobus. Et puis, pour les plus jeunes, ce sera fortement encouragé, recommandé, surtout pour les plus vieux de l'élémentaire, de porter un masque lors de ces déplacements et dans des espaces communs.
So the next question, of course, that I've been hearing is, we're making masks mandatory in some cases, so how will our schools be enforcing the mask policy? And maybe, François, I can start with you on this one.
Yes. So, commençons en français. Alors, nous avons certainement en place un inventaire important de masques jetables. Nous comptons garder un œil sur cet inventaire et au besoin, nous commanderons des boîtes de masques supplémentaires, comprenant qu'il y arrivera par moment où un individu n'aura pas avec lui son propre masque. We already have a large inventory of disposable masks. We will be keeping an eye on this inventory and making sure, if necessary, that we order additional boxes. This, of course, if someone has forgotten to bring a mask with them.
All right. And so at the public schools branch, Norbert, how about there? I mean, enforcing the mask policy, I can imagine, might be sort of tricky.
For sure, it can be tricky, but schools do enforce lots of rules, and we follow policies and procedures for a number of things. And I would say, on the same vein as François, we will have extra masks available for students that, for some reason, do not have one. But what I want to stress today, most importantly, is that we will be very proactive and want to educate our students and our communities about the importance of wearing a mask. And really, you can cobble that together in what's called progressive discipline. So when we have students coming without a mask, we can ask the students why they're not wearing a mask. And our hope would be that through proactive measures of educating our staff and our students, that we will be able to avoid any situations where we have non-compliance, because it is really important. We'll be stressing that. We're giving our staff permission to stop and talk with students about the importance of this. We really want to stress that it's about relationships and making kids feel comfortable in their school again, and that will be part of it. Now, down the road, if there's outright refusal, we'll have to deal with that, and we may need to call parents or guardians and say, look, this is the policy that we have in place, and we really need cooperation, and we'll take it from there. But we do have to remember, we will have a small percentage that will not be able to wear masks, and we have to be okay with that.
No, thank you. And just like everything, it takes practice to learn how to wear a mask. And I mean, my children are starting to wear a mask now to try and get ready. I know my son has spacers in his mouth for his teeth. And, he's had some challenges there. So I think it's really important to start practicing wearing masks now so children are ready for school. And Dr. Morrison, maybe you can give us some practical tips and suggestions on how to properly wear and store masks.
Okay, I mean, I want to agree with you right off the bat that it is a good time to really use this time in the next week, but in the weeks ahead to practice with our children and students and staff alike to practice wearing a mask. And I know there'll be more information that we can link onto the provincial website about the proper donning and doffing, so the taking on and off of masks and how it's stored. I do want to certainly make mention of the fact that masks are an important layer of protection, but they do not replace physical distancing, good hand hygiene, and other basic public health measures. Non-medical masks can lower the risk of transmission of COVID-19 when physical distancing is not possible, but it does not replace those other measures. So non-medical masks should be made of two tightly woven layers, at least two layers, such as cotton or linen. They should not be shared. It's not something to trade at school. And they should fit well. They should fit comfortably over the nose and the mouth. And it's important, really important, to wash your hands before you put the mask on, before you take the mask off, after you touch the mask at any time. And when they're not being used, they could be stored in a paper bag or a linen cloth, and they should be washed frequently. So you can wash them with household laundry or in hot soapy water and make sure they're dried thoroughly. So I think the masks are certainly new, not just for students and staff in the school system, but they're also something that more broadly we're all getting used to.
Right, thank you. So it sounds like, as parents, we should also make sure that our children have a couple of masks for sure, and then we wash them regularly. And because hand cleaning, sanitizer, or washing your hands especially is important, we'll keep that in mind in our schools too. Yeah. So, as a school community, of course, we have put measures in place to protect the health and safety of students and staff, including protocols for if a student or staff were to become sick at school. And this is a very common question. So maybe starting with Norbert, can you explain how the school boards will handle if a child or staff person becomes sick at school?
So this is a common occurrence in education at all times. And I have complete faith in our staff. We deal with this on a regular basis, and now the ante has been upped, of course, with COVID-19. But generally what happens is that we check in with that student, but now, in this case, it's going to have a little more weight to it. So what we would be asking, if a student is or a staff member is showing signs that are consistent with COVID-19, that person don a mask right away if they don't have one on. Then we'd arrange a phone call to have that person picked up or to travel home if it's a staff member. After that, they must call 811. We'll be asking them to do that and supporting them through that if they need help with that. And in all areas that person was, after they are removed from the area they were, they would be in a designated area that each school will have where someone may go if they're not feeling well and have symptoms of COVID-19. After that student or staff person has left, that area would be disinfected thoroughly, and we would take our advice from CPHO after that, depending on the test results.
Okay. Et François, peut-être le même pour la communauté française?
Justement par remercier toute l'équipe administrative qui a travaillé très fort pour préparer les écoles pendant l'été et puis bien sûr identifier un espace où si advenant quelqu'un montre un des signes pourrait s'isoler avant son départ. Alors les étapes sont les mêmes en français qu'en anglais, hein? Ça ne dérange pas la langue. Donc l'élève ou le membre du personnel doit être pris en charge ou quitter l'école immédiatement. Alors il y a un espace réservé pour ça. Il leur sera demandé de porter un masque. Et puis bien, déjà, on a les masques, mais même s'ils étaient plus jeunes, on va demander absolument si la personne doit attendre quelqu'un pour venir la ramasser d'avoir un masque, puis de s'isoler dans un espace désigné. Ensuite, ils doivent, on invite les gens à appeler 811 pour s'identifier puis faire le test de dépistage. Et puis toutes les zones utilisées par ces individus-là seront nettoyées immédiatement par notre personnel compétent.
Merci, c'est très important. So, one thing that people have been asking me is, what if you have seasonal allergies and so you have a cough or a runny nose and, it's not related to COVID? Will those people also follow the same procedures, Norbert?
Okay, it's a good question, and I know it's one that parents and students and the general public do want to know, and we do recognize that runny noses will happen and seasonal allergies will come about as we enter the school year. It's our hope that because we're focusing on our health so much, that maybe there's a reduction in some of the things we usually see in school, but I guess that remains to be seen. But I do want to reassure people that, not every student will be sent home because they have a runny nose. We will do our due diligence, and that's why we're asking for support from home and that pre-screening. So that you have a conversation with your son or daughter as they leave for school that morning, and are you feeling well? And if it's just a runny nose and the child is feeling fine otherwise, then that is okay. However, if there's symptoms beyond that are worrisome or concerning, excessive tiredness, a fever, a new and unexpected cough, then it would be best for that child to stay home. But we will work with the children like we always do each and every day to ensure they're healthy, and we'll keep the lines of communication open with home.
Well, thank you. And I know as a parent myself, that does put my mind at ease. It was something I really had wondered about. So, Dr. Morrison, feel free, of course, to weigh in on that topic, but perhaps you could walk us through what happens if a student or staff person has to get tested for COVID-19. When will they be able to return to school?
Okay, so I may have, I think the discussion around rhinitis or runny nose and congestion, that combination of symptoms, I think we need to, continue to talk about going forward. It is that it's a little different if a child comes in from outside on a cold day and their nose runs, but it can be certainly a symptom, an early symptom, and with children having very mild symptoms with COVID, it's something we'll continue to look at. But in terms of any child or student or staff who's tested for COVID-19, when the results come back, they would be able to go back to school as long as they feel well and they're not still sick, because we certainly, as you mentioned, we don't want children going back or staff going back to school if they have influenza, even if they tested negative for COVID-19. So they would really, if they have a negative test result and feel well, then they can go back to school.
Okay, well, that's really good to hear too. So if we think they might have COVID, they get tested. Then once they're feeling better, if they have a negative test result, they go back to school. So if a child or staff person is sent home and has to self-isolate while they wait for the test results, who else, in their circle would have to self-isolate or get tested? That's a big one.
And I think that's a really important question, and I'd like to. This is a bit of a change from what we may have talked about before, and I think this will help in many family situations. That at this time, based on our epidemiology in the province, and of course this can change, but all household contacts will not need to isolate at home while they're waiting for the test results, for instance, of a child. But of course, if a result comes back positive, the household members as well as all the close contacts will be tested, as well as having to self-isolate. So for instance, if a parent comes to pick up a child because they have a new onset of symptoms, they'll get tested. Child obviously won't be left alone. They'll be wait for the test results to come back. But the other people in the family will all not need to be removed from school or work to wait for that test result. And I think that will be really helpful and important for our functioning in the system. more broadly. So we know that the schools and school system will be following public health advice throughout the pandemic, and that advice may change over time, and I expect it will change over the course of the year. But at this point in time, I think that that has been a change that I think is important, and will make it easier for families, so that both, for instance, mom and dad might not need to, and siblings might not all need to be at home waiting for those results of that child if they're symptomatic at this point in time.
Wow, that's such a good thing. So important that if a child is being tested while they're waiting for the test results, really they need a caregiver, but not everybody in their family has to self-isolate. That's so good. And at the end of the day, we want to ensure the safety of everyone in our school community and, of course, the island. And as you pointed out, it's important to note that plans will change as direction changes and as we learn more and we respond to the needs. Now, Norbert, could you explain to us how learning will happen if a child or a teacher has to self-isolate?
Sure. So the public schools branch will be doing in-school learning. So all students are back in school, so it's not an option to say, I want to choose to stay home and do remote learning. However, there are some exceptions, which I'll speak to. So it's in class for all our K-12 students. Now, in saying that, there will be some students that are immunocompromised, and based on consultation with their healthcare provider, they may need to stay home. And if that is the case, we do have a procedure for that, work with student services at the PSB and also the Department of Education and Lifelong Learning to provide remote learning for individuals in those situations. Now, it depends on the nature of what's going on in that particular classroom. So if it was a teacher, if the teacher only is home because of a presumptive case or a case, then we would have to have a substitute in place, obviously. However, if it was an entire class or a cohort, then we would have to make arrangements for, and the teacher was included in that, of course, we would have to make arrangements for remote learning for the entire class.
Et François, allez-vous avoir des protocoles semblables?
Oui, nous aurons des protocoles identiques au Public School Branch. Nous avons aussi un enseignant qui sera consacré à appuyer tous les élèves ayant une santé immunocompromise. Advenant la mise en place d'un modèle hybride, ce professionnel aura aussi pour tâche de développer l'approche pédagogique de classe inversée, ce qui pourrait bien servir aussi les enseignants en même temps. Mais nous comptons nous assurer là, que les élèves qui ne sont pas en mesure d'être à l'école reçoivent un appui, un encadrement adéquat dans ce contexte-là.
Okay, merci. So, I mean, I feel very confident that our schools really have done an excellent job of putting measures in place to deal with all of those potential situations. But I realize that some people still do have anxiety about returning to school this fall and sending their kids back to school. And this is a question I've heard quite a few times, and is, do families have the option to continue with at-home learning or home education? So maybe, Norbert, I'll ask you to answer that one.
So like I said earlier, it is full school for a K-12 system. And outside of the immunocompromised or a situation where a student was asked to self-isolate, then the only other option beyond those 2 points would be for a home learning model or home schooling effectively is what we called it, which is a procedure that has to be applied for through the Ministry of Education.
Okay, great. So the short and simple answer is home education works the same as it did in any other year if you choose to homeschool.
That's correct. It works in the same fashion. However, we do realize that we may need to migrate to a different model depending on, being that this is a fluid situation. So if that's the case, we are prepared for that.
Okay, and I mean, if you are considering homeschooling your child, you do need to register. And right now, I mean, Last year, there were around 230 students in the province that were registered, and this year, I'm told about 165 so far had registered for this school year. So it's under what was last year. So make sure you do if you decide to go that route. And you should also check out the website for all the details on what sports are available. And I should mention, in terms of supports, you can use the province's curriculum during homeschooling, and you to provide a deposit. I believe it's a $50 deposit, and then you can get that $50 back when you return the materials at the end of the year. So on the topic of anxiety that both students and staff and parents may be feeling right now, will there be any additional resources or preparation to deal with potential anxiety and increased behavior this year? And maybe I'll ask François to answer that one first.
Oui, merci. Le personnel est en place et sera là pour vous accueillir. Alors, on a les équipes de bien-être scolaire qui vont continuer de travailler. Nous avons aussi des conseillers qui sont formés en counseling qui seront présents à l'école pour appuyer tous ceux qui en ont besoin. Notre personnel aura aussi accès à une formation dans le domaine du traumatisme et les dynamiques humaines d'un expert dans la matière, un monsieur Patrick Gilbert Rivard, qui est aussi directeur des opérations canadiennes du North American Center for Treatment Assessment and Trauma Response. La formation du 4 septembre fournira les outils adéquats à notre personnel et permettra de mieux accueillir nos élèves et nos familles dans le cadre de cette rentrée toute particulière. Donc, nous sommes là pour vous accueillir. Ça va bien aller. We're all in this together.
Merci, François. And that's so true. And Norbert, maybe you could talk about that from a public schools branch perspective, addressing anxiety.
Yes, because it's a very important topic for us at the public schools branch. And I know on Friday of last week, I had the opportunity to visit our student services team at the public schools branch when they were making plans for the upcoming year, which they've made several throughout the summer, and they've done a great job, and they have some really valuable resources out there. But I do want to speak highly of our staff. In general in schools. We wrap around students as they come back to school in September every year, and we realize that this year we need to be there and have that tight support for them more than ever. So it's really important. And we have been messaging our teachers about the importance of slowing down and taking what COVID-19 has given us in a positive light, because that may sound funny, but it allows us to slow down and talk to our students and talk to our children to make sure they understand that it's okay to be anxious and that we need to talk about it and we need to lean into it. And we really are hopeful and confident that we'll do a good job of that. Our school counselors will be invaluable as we go forward. And I know they just received training called the Prepare training, and that will help them very much. And there has been some extra staffing that's been added. So we are very comfortable with where we are, and we know when students get back, we will give them the support they need.
Well, thanks, Norbert. And it's so important to know that we are all in this together. And so thank you to really everyone, the students, the parents, the staff, for your patience and flexibility as we work through this. Because things will change. That's the one guarantee in life, one of them. So I'd like to mention that some schools across the province have decided to stagger start dates of school so that newer grades entering the school can have an orientation day. And that means that some students may start school on September 8th, while others will start on September 9th. So schools will communicate directly to parents and guardians their intended start dates. Just to reiterate, if there's an orientation day in a school, the first year students may start on September 8th, but the rest of the grades may not start till September 9th. So as a school community, I know how much we all look forward to seeing our newest and youngest learners join the school system. And for a grade like kindergarten that is more play-based, how will teachers work with shared materials and equipment? Maybe Norbert, take us.
Sure. And to your point, Mr. Minister, some schools will take that option where it's a transition year for students. It could be a grade 7, first time in grade 7, obviously at a junior high, or grade 10 at a high school or kindergarten, and there's a few other examples, but schools will communicate that, and you will see more communication directly from your school as teachers are back this week and administrators are back last week. And kindergarten is play-based. Very fortunate that we were able to complete a comprehensive study on our kindergarten program here in the province, all through COVID, actually. So that study has been finalized, and the results are lining up very well with evidence-based research around the world that the best curriculum and the best delivery of the curriculum in kindergarten remains play-based. So yes, it will remain play-based. And I do want to reassure people that kindergarten is a strict cap. There is no more than 18 students in a kindergarten class at any times, and most of our classes right now are well below the 18. Not in all cases, however, but most. So it will be play-based, and we're asking staff in those kindergarten classes and at the school to prioritize what's being used and when it's being used so it can be disinfected properly within reason. So for example, if you're familiar with a K class, there may be a dramatic play center where students love that and they dress up and they act. There may be a Lego block center. So it will take some reworking to make sure that students are there on a scheduled basis, and the teacher is aware of when the students are there, and we'll work closely with cleaners and custodians to make sure things are properly sanitized.
Well, thank you, Norbert. And François, qu'est-ce que c'est la situation dans la commission scolaire de langue française?
Oui, alors les enfants, bien sûr, le contexte d'apprentissage est le même en français qu'en anglais. La seule différence, c'est qu'on crée un contexte d'apprentissage où on peut jouer en français et puis on va continuer à créer cet environnement où on peut apprendre par le jeu en français. Et puis aussi, j'aimerais souligner qu'il y a plusieurs de nos enseignants de la maternelle qui ont choisi d'inviter les parents et leurs enfants à une soirée d'information et une visite avec leurs enfants avant la première journée du 8 septembre. Puis je vais en profiter pour justement remercier les directions et ces enseignants de la maternelle pour leur dévouement. So I'm not going to repeat, like the only difference is we learn in French, but other than that, it's through play-based approaches. Just one thing though is to several of our kindergarten teachers have chosen to invite parents and their child to an information session and a visit with their child entering primary before the first day of September 8th. I would like to thank the principals and the teachers for their dedication because it needs to be mentioned here, I think.
Well, merci, François. So Dr. Morrison, one thing that I forgot to ask you was if there is a positive case in a school, then what happens? How do you treat that?
Well, our office, or I am notified, or Dr. Sabapathy notified immediately about a positive case, and we'll, of course, overall, we'll be working very closely with school principals and others to manage the situation. But when a COVID case is a positive, I will call the individual, or in the case of a child, the parents, to advise them of the positive lab result. And then it's really in that initial discussion that we start gathering some information, and they're advised to self-isolate and continue self-isolating because they'll have been waiting at home for that result. It's followed shortly after by a call from public health nursing, where they will help collect the information of other close contacts they would have had, but we also then are reaching out to get class lists, for instance, or anyone who may have been in the same cohort. Anyone who is a close contact will need to be tested and will be advised to self-isolate for 14 days after the last exposure to that to the case. They will be identified. They will be contacted by public health nursing. So not everyone in the school needs to reach out to us. We will be contacting anyone who is identified as a close contact. A close contact is not someone who walked by you in the hallway. It's someone who's had face-to-face contact for a number of minutes, it'll go back up to 48 hours prior to the onset of symptoms or prior to the test result if they're asymptomatic. Every case and every close contact is followed up daily by public health nursing for that period of time. And of course, if any close contact develops symptoms during that period of 14 days, they of course will be tested we'll go from there. We're often asked, what does that mean for the broader school community? I think a positive case will really reinforce why the cohorts are really important. Because if we can keep a case or two cases within a cohort, it will mean that it won't disrupt a school region, a school more broadly. So I think this will all happen very quickly. When it does, it will naturally create lots of anxiety and a lot of work. But that's what we do, and we'll work closely with the school system. I think one thing that's been useful is that there's been a recent tabletop exercise with the principals, I think just a few days ago, where they sort of practiced and went through the process of what the communication would look like and what it would mean. And I think that was helpful in moving forward. So I think if there are a number of, and I've said this before, if there are a number of cases all of a sudden identified through different cohorts in the school, that will look much different. And it will also depend on what's going on in the broader community. And it will, we are not alone in facing some of these tough questions. The rest of the provinces and territories are also looking at this, and it will really it'll really emphasize why those measures, public health measures of staying home when you're sick, distancing, cleaning, hand washing, the non-medical mask will be so critical, because those things together, those layers, may stop that transmission more broadly. And the better we can do that, the better it will be, not just for the schools, but for the families and the communities more broadly.
Well, thank you. So many important points there. So we focused a lot on the school day so far. So let's turn to something else, and it's something that's been discussed for a long time now, and that's transportation to and from school and how that will work. So I'll start with Norbert, and maybe you can talk about things like how many school buses will be on the roads, how many stops would a school bus typically make during a school day, basically how is transportation going to look this year?
Okay. So you will see 261 buses on Island roads from the public schools branch as the school year begins, and that entails 14,000 stops. And I just want to reassure people that the bus will stop at all designated stops. Now, we have been asking for help to reduce ridership on the buses, and any help we can get is muchly appreciated. However, busing will continue as per normal. And now with the masking mandate, that helps us out a lot in terms of having students who find it difficult to physically distance on a bus, and it's not their fault. It's the design of the bus. But we do also share with Dr. Morrison's thoughts about masking. It's not a superhero feature that's going to allow you to ignore all the other things, because it's really important that our students physically distance when possible, and then wash their hands accordingly. So the buses will run. Some of the routes have been rejigged to make sure they are more efficient. And as the school year starts up, there's always delays, and I want people to be patient with that. And this year will be no exception. There will be some delays as we get going, but buses will be available, and they will look very similar to other years. With the addition of the masking, that may look different.
Well, thank you, Norbert. And François, how about in the French language school board?
Oui, merci. Nous avons présentement 30 autobus pour desservir 6 écoles. Alors, la durée et le nombre d'arrêts varient beaucoup d'un autobus à l'autre, surtout du contexte d'un milieu rural versus le milieu urbain. Bien sûr, nous allons renforcer le port du masque à l'intérieur de l'autobus. Alors, on va demander aux parents de collaborer avec nous pour s'assurer que les enfants ont un masque dans l'autobus. Et puis, le reste, les pratiques sont similaires. Alors, certainement encourager les parents qu'ils peuvent d'amener leur enfant à l'école, ce serait grandement apprécié, mais en même temps, on comprend que c'est pas possible. Alors, le service de transport est en place et puis nous serons prêts à offrir le service dès la rentrée.
So, François, will there be any additional school buses and drivers on the road this year at the CSLF?
Oui, nous avons un autobus supplémentaire. Alors, nous avions 29, maintenant nous avons 30 autobus. Oui.
And Norbert, how about at the public schools branch? Any extra?
Yes, we do. We have added buses, especially for routes that we were concerned about as being too lengthy or not efficient, especially in light of what's going on with COVID-19. So there has been buses added, and we do have a complement of substitute drivers and substitute buses.
Okay, so we've talked about masks being required on school buses, but is there anything else that students and parents should know about this year when it comes to riding the bus?
Of course, there always is. Any help we can get especially with our little students, because that comes with a lot of angst, especially kindergarten students coming for the first time. However, there's a couple pieces that are really important. On the first day of school, or the second day, you will get an information sheet, student information. It's called student information sheet, and it's really important that you fill it out and confirm that everything is appropriate on the sheet, because it does have your civic address and pick up and drop off and things of that nature. But in the meantime, especially for our new students, it's good practice to call the school, talk to one of the admin assistants, and to make sure that your anxieties are allayed when it comes to pick-up and drop-offs. And anyone that's been taking a bus in the past is still eligible. You do not have to contact anyone. The bus will stop at the stop. But if you go on the Public Schools Branch website, there is a platform on there. You can register. You get a login username, and you can go on, and it'll give you estimated pick-up and drop-off times for your child. So there are a few things there, but one thing we will ask for a little more cooperation with is what's called a bus pass. And a bus pass is when you could call a school and you go to a different location after school, and that's deemed as being problematic in light of what's going on right now. So if it's a child care situation, absolutely. However, it's not going to birthday parties and other events. We just cannot do that at this point.
Okay. Et François, je pense que le même pour la CSLF, mais how do families register for busing through the CSLF? Comment les familles font-elles pour s'inscrire?
Puis, nous établissons les routes à partir de l'information pour établir les horaires. Dans certaines régions, plus tôt on l'a, mieux c'est, parce qu'on a des fois des grands territoires à couvrir. Et puis, bien sûr, en début d'année scolaire, c'est important, dès les premiers jours, de valider s'il y a lieu. Alors, l'école peut valider l'information que nous avons au cas où il y aurait certaines informations qui soient différentes. La même chose aussi pour les permissions spéciales. Alors, il faudra certainement s'en tenir à l'essentiel, donc en termes de garde partagée, de garde scolaire. Certainement, ce seront des situations majeures et non pas pour des occasions ponctuelles que nous allons offrir un transport alternatif.
Okay, merci. So thank you both. That's great information. I was also add that while busing is available, for any student who needs it, we are encouraging students to walk, bike, or get a drive to school, if possible, to minimize the number of individuals on buses this year. And personally, I'd like to see many more kids walking and biking as well, just for the health and wellness side of things. So I think we've covered a lot of important information this afternoon about the return to in-class learning this fall. But we have also received questions about how or when schools may need to return to remote learning, which I hope we don't have to do. I know a lot of work has been done by the English and French curriculum specialists in the department, a lot of work, to prepare for that event. So maybe we can talk a bit more about that. Maybe Norbert, I'd ask you to start on that front.
Sure. So again, we're very fortunate to live where we live, and we have in-school learning starting next week, and we're really excited about that. However, being realistic, we may need to migrate to a different model, and we are prepared for that. We are certainly in a better position than we were last spring when this was sprung upon us. So in terms of getting materials such as Chromebooks and devices out, if that is necessary, we can do that in a more timely manner. We're very confident with that. The Department of Education and Lifelong Learning have done a great job of compacting the curriculum, and if I would, I'd like to say to pare it down and then front load it. So what the curriculum will look like come September will be different. However, the foundational learnings, or the learnings that are most important, the building blocks for future learning, will happen starting in September. Some things have been put up by the wayside because the ones that we're focusing on are most important, plus they also reach back to some of the things that would have been missed because of the shutdown earlier. We're also working with our staffs as school starts up next week, and this week with staffs, in terms of professional development around best practices for what platforms we will be using with students. And we do want to reassure people that we are prepared if there's technical difficulties. You live in an area where the Wi-Fi signal is not there when you need it. We are prepared to have hard copies and do the best we can to make sure we're reaching everyone.
Oh, thank you. And my understanding is really we're at the forefront in Canada when it comes to curriculum and the adjustments we're making to address the gaps. So really good kudos to the folks working on that. François, is there anything else you'd like to add? Voulez-vous ajouter quelque chose?
Oui, merci. Alors, certainement, comme je l'ai mentionné plus tôt, nous avons une journée de formation le 4 septembre avec M. Patrick Rivard. Et puis, c'est l'occasion pour nos enseignants de mieux s'outiller pour être capable d'accueillir puis d'accompagner nos élèves et leurs familles aussi dans cette rentrée. La rentrée doit d'abord être on doit se concentrer sur la partie relationnelle. Alors, comment nos jeunes entre eux pourront se retrouver puis réapprendre à jouer dans un contexte scolaire avec leur père. Alors, c'est certainement une grande partie. Ensuite, comme mentionné plus tôt, certainement aussi aller retrouver les acquis, les apprentissages qui ont été faits pendant la période où ça se faisait à distance, entre mars et juin. Puis ensuite, l'équipe du ministère a travaillé très fort, l'équipe de M. René Urtubise, pour aller identifier ces résultats dans les programmes d'études qui doivent être couverts. Donc, ces résultats essentiels. Alors, il y a un travail de toute l'équipe qui a été fait. Et puis, encore là, il y aura de l'information pendant les préparatifs cette semaine pour préparer les enseignants à cette rentrée. Ensuite, donner l'accès à la technologie est un autre élément important, s'assurer que nos enseignants sont prêts. Ce n'est pas ce qu'on souhaite, mais que c'est advenant qu'il fallait retourner en enseignement à domicile. Alors, comment on va se préparer, on va travailler, appuyer notre équipe au cas où ça devait arriver.
Oh, merci, très bien. So, obviously, our number one priority is getting children back to in-person, in-class learning, because we know that's where they learn the best. But it is reassuring to know that we are prepared if a school, a family of school, or even, God forbid, the entire school system has to change to remote learning. We have covered a lot of information here today, and I really hope it has been helpful for everyone who's watching it at home. We'll continue, of course, to communicate and provide information as time goes on. Make sure you check out our website, princeedwardisland.ca/backtoschool. Before we wrap up, is there anything we would like to add, especially Dr. Morrison or, Norbert, François?
I mean, I think maybe just to mention again what I said in the beginning, that we are really fortunate with the preparations that have been done through the system and with the Commission and the Public Schools branch, that we are also have great conditions to go back to in-school learning. We have low prevalence of disease in this province and no widespread community transmission, so we are really in a fortunate position. So I think that bears mentioning again, and I think you've also mentioned it is really normal for parents and children to feel anxious going back to school. I share in that not only with my own children, but I also feel concerned for everyone, and I hope it goes really well in the weeks ahead. So, thank you.
Well, thank you, and I know that I'm really excited about the new school year, and most of the parents and the students I talk to are very excited too, and I know this year will be different. But, let's all make the most of it and continue to learn and grow. And I know our school administrators have been working very hard to create individual school plans for their students and staff. And I would encourage anyone who hasn't reviewed their school's plan for the fall to view them. Again, that's at princeedwardisland.ca/back-to-school. Check them out. There's some great videos coming out by administrators as well. Communicate with your schools. They'll give you all the information you need. Thanks for tuning in, and I want to wish everyone a safe and healthy return to school. Thank you.